But before I get to all of that, I want to talk about something that is a little more real than many of the news stories that are around today, and a little more personal than what you may come to expect when it comes to the front page of the paper or, say, the 6 p.m. news. Last night, there was a huge reaction when I highlighted the comments of a gentleman who was at his wit's end on the central coast of New South Wales, who had to move out of Sydney because of the cost of rent. He's now in a scenario where if rent goes up, he is going to have to move again, and that's a good chance that he, his family and his little girl are going to be homeless.
One more rent increase and my family, my one-year-old baby, we're facing homelessness and we've got nowhere to go.
Now, I've spoken a lot about the number of people that are this close to homelessness. Sometimes I get the number wrong and say 2 million. It's actually 3 and a bit million. That is an extraordinary indictment on our federal government. But before you think, hey, Paul, I've heard you say all this before, and you start to tune out, no, come back, pay attention. Because last night on SBS, there was another example of another Australian who was doing it tough. And this was on the Insight program on SBS. Now, I really like this show because essentially they sit around, they do a forum with people, they get really interesting stories, all different perspectives. I quite like the show. But there was one bloke in particular who symbolises, just like that guy did on Q&A, millions of people who are struggling, millions of people who couldn't work any harder, but they go backwards every day.
Currently juggling 3 jobs. So I'm holding a full-time job down in the insurance sector. I'm doing Uber Eats and DoorDash food delivery in whatever free time I can get. And on top of that, I'm also making YouTube videos online as an extra source of income. When I first started 3 years ago, I was doing 70 hours a week. And I held that up across an entire year. I hit a New Year's resolution and I said, man, I am killing myself out here.
One of his YouTube videos, and I didn't know about them until that program, was him walking around his suburb talking about the difficulties of cost of living that we have focused on almost every show at the start of our show for the past 3 years.
Things are expensive. The cost of living is insane right now. If you are just working one job and you're on the median income in Australia, $67,000 per year right now, you are living just above the poverty line. 10 years ago, I was earning probably half of what I earned. I worked one job and things just seemed easier to afford. I could go out and buy things. I wasn't stressing about groceries. I wasn't stressing about paying rent.
And with the federal election just weeks away, there's a key question. Who's he going to vote for?
Who will you be voting for in the election?
The way things are going, it's whoever screws me the least. I think a lot of people have lost a lot of faith in our politicians, in our political parties at this point. So whoever screws me the least is probably going to get my vote. I'm going to be looking at policy. I'm going to be reading policy. And more importantly, I think we've lost faith a lot as Australians at this point. We have our pensioners struggling to retire. They can't retire. And if our pensioners can't retire right now, what the is going on with me when I retire? Can I retire? Am I working till the day I die? Because this is looking pretty grim in my stances.
We know people are hurting. We know people are starting to get angry, and they're sick of being told that everything is getting better when their life is only getting worse. More than 3 million people this close to homelessness, and the number of people who are homeless in this country is the record number it's ever been. But again, before you think, well, hang on, Paul, haven't you sung this song before? Yes, I have. But there are others that are noticing. Simon Benson, writing in the Australian newspaper Today, makes the following point, that Australia's living standards are the worst in the developed world. No other developed nation in the world has suffered the decline in living standards anywhere near the magnitude of Australia. No amount of boasting that the household recession has finally come to an end can alter that reality. He continues, fresh OECD data in the form of updated data set on household income shows that even after the marginally better but still slightly grim economic news, Australia's living standards continue to be the worst in the world. And there's no bounce back coming soon, at least not within this decade. The updated OECD data released in the past 2 weeks gives expression to this. The average gains in living standards by OECD countries, whereas we're talking about places like the United States, New Zealand, Canada, UK, the first world basically, is up 5% and a bit since March 2022. Australia in decline. Before this week's national accounts, the cumulative fall in living standards was a negative 8.3. So the rest of the world goes forward, Australia goes backwards. They go forward 5.5, we go backwards 8.3. And again, if you think you've heard all of this before, new data out today shows us that Australians are losing hope. It comes via this study from the Australian National University. It helps put, again, more data, more insight into how Australians are feeling about their lives, about the future for their kids and the future for their country. Overall life satisfaction between October 2009 and the dots on the far right of your screen is January 2025. You can see that Australia is turning pessimistic about its current situation and about its future. You can see that those numbers are the worst even after periods of time like the COVID pandemic. Now, there's a lot inside all of this, and I want to take you through it nice and slowly because it's many thousands of people who participated in this survey. And there are some people whose sense of doom is linked to things like climate change and housing affordability, but I want to zone in on this issue in and around cost of living, that it's not just a talking point. It is a moment where Australia is going backwards, and this government promised to make it better, instead worse, after the past 3 years. In fact, have a look at this. Life in the past 12 months, 31% of people saying that it is worse. Just 21% saying better. Everyone else basically saying pretty much the same. And of course, if life has been tough and it's still pretty much the same, then that's way over 50% that are in a world of pain right now. Specifically, in and around the issue of cost of living and the effect on your household, again, I show you this here, that 35% of people believe that things are worse since since 2023. So despite too little, too late tax cuts, despite 4/5 of bugger all, $25 a month when it comes to power, the reality is this, 35% of people, their household is financially worse off under this government. Meantime, if you have a look at the overall graph here about the percentage of Australians who find it difficult or very difficult when it comes to their own financial circumstances, have a look. These are not good graphs for our country. These show how unhappy, emotionally unhealthy and struggling too many people are. Equally depressing about all of this is, does anyone think anything's going to get better? Yes, about 29% of people, so less than a third, say it is going to get better. But once you put together same, which is the worst in recent memory, plus those, the quarter who believe it's going to get worse, you can see there, 66 and a bit percent, almost 67% of people who believe that things are not going to get better. And then we come to the part that broke my heart. How do we feel about our kids and the life that they will have in an Australia that is supposed to be the greatest place in the world? As a person who's got 2 little ones, this one broke my heart. 58% of people in this survey believe that their kids' lives will be worse than theirs. Almost 60% of people believe that their children are going to be worse off. What will life be like in the next 50 years? 50% of people there also believe that life is going to be worse. So it's worse for their kids, it'll be worse for them as they move into retirement and then into the oldest of years. And when it comes to this current government and the institution of federal parliament, this survey, again, is heartbreaking. It's one thing to talk with pride about your country, and we do. It's one to love our country, and we do. But one of the reasons that we have remained laser-focused on cost of living for the past 3 years is because if you cannot provide for yourself or for your kids, if you are one of 3 million people who doesn't know where their food is going to come from, if you're the bloke who is working 70 hours a week and you still can't make ends meet, then our system is failing. Every member of the Australian Federal Parliament has received not one but 3 pay rises in the past 3 years. Every member of the Australian Public Service has received their biggest pay rise in 10 years. But what do people think about the institution that is federal parliament? Do you have confidence in the federal government? It is now down. 66% of people have little to no confidence in the federal government. in part because they don't do enough, in part because they claim they're doing more when they aren't doing enough. But again, let's compare that over time. Have a look at this graph again. It's the same when it comes to our trust in the federal government. It's the same when it comes to our confidence in the life that is there for our kids. It is the same when it comes to our own financial circumstance. If anyone thinks that politicians like Jim Chalmers or the Prime Minister can spin and BS their way, that everything is better when everything is worse, good luck. But to see the greatest country in the world having an awful lot of people in it who don't have faith in its future, then we are at a fork in the road. We need to get rid of this government. The government that lied their way to power, that promised that everything would be cheaper, instead everything became more expensive. And now, because they're able to cobble together some numbers deeply affected by government spending that make things seem ever so slightly better than the bottom dip, the reality is, how could anyone vote for the return of a government that has presided over not just a break in our finances, but a break in our hearts? We are at a fork in the road. Now, I don't know if this election that this means people go further to the left or further to the right than the parties of government, searching for someone, anyone, who is going to promise them a better future than what they have currently had. But off all of these numbers, there is no way that anyone is going to be voting for the current government because they think they've done a good job. It's going to be, at best, out of partisan loyalty or about something even deeper than that. But it's not going to be based off any sort of quality performance. Those numbers are frightening, and that's why I talk about that before we get to tariffs and the politics of all of that. It's not unimportant, but this stuff is a little heartbeat check about a country whose pulse is getting weaker.